Lena tied her apron tightly and sighed as she looked around the quiet diner. The same one she'd worked in every night for the last 3 years. She was used to being invisible, just a waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile that most people didn't even notice. The routine was always the same. Pour coffee, take orders, smile politely, and keep her worries buried deep. That night felt no different until a young couple in the corner booth looked embarrassed as they handed over a declined card. The girl was pregnant, the boy was flustered, and both looked ready to cry from shame. Lena glanced around, saw that no one noticed, and whispered, "It's okay, I'll cover it." They stared at her, stunned, but she smiled gently and slid her own tip money into the register. She didn't think twice, it was just something someone should do. Unbeknownst to Lena, someone had seen everything, the quiet gesture, the way she covered the bill, and the way she returned to wiping tables, like nothing had happened. In a dark corner of the diner sat a man in a sleek charcoal suit, expression unreadable, eyes sharp like cut steel. He hadn't planned on stopping here. He was supposed to catch a flight, but something about the small town sign had pulled him in. Now, with a black coffee cooling in front of him, he found himself fixated not on the menu, but on her. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, magazine sense, but something about her radiated warmth he hadn't felt in years. When she finally approached his table with her notepad, she smiled that same quiet smile. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked softly. He looked at her, paused, and simply said, "Your name?" Lena blinked, surprised by the man's question, unused to customers who even noticed her name tag, let alone asked for it. "It's Lena," she replied cautiously, unsure why her name suddenly felt so personal on her tongue. The man nodded once and looked back down at his untouched coffee, as if storing the name somewhere deep. He didn't give his own name back, didn't flirt, didn't smile, just stared at the window like he was carrying the weight of a city. Lena left the table feeling like she'd stepped into a different story for a moment, one she didn't belong in. But the stranger remained. Even after the diner emptied out, long after his coffee had gone cold, he watched her clean, watched her help the cook carry boxers, watched her tip the dishwasher from her own pocket. And when he finally stood to leave, he placed a card on the table with a single word, "Thank you." Lena found the card while wiping down his table, confused by its elegance. It wasn't a business card, but something heavier, textured, and expensive. She turned it over and saw nothing but a name in fine print. Evan Collister. No title, no contact, just the name. She didn't recognize it, but when she showed the cook, his eyes widened. "That's the Evan Collister, CEO of Collister Corp, billionaire." Lena laughed, thinking it was a joke, but her stomach twisted with a strange, nervous flutter. Why would a man like that come into a dusty old diner in the middle of nowhere? And why would he notice her? She shrugged it off, put the card in her apron pocket, and got back to work because fantasies didn't pay rent. But all day, her mind kept circling back to his eyes, dark, steady, unreadably in the way he said her name, like he'd been waiting to hear it, and she hated how badly she wanted him to come back. 2 nights later, just before closing, the door chimed in. There he was again. Same suit, same stillness, same eyes that felt like they could peel back everything she was hiding. She tried to act casual, but her hands shook slightly as she grabbed a mug and walked to his booth. "I didn't think you were coming back," she said, placing the coffee down. "I didn't think I would either," he replied simply, his voice deep, but quiet, like a secret. Lena sat across from him without asking why, as if something unspoken had already drawn her in. They talked not about business, not about the world he came from, but about books, late nights, and childhood fears. And when he left, he didn't say goodbye, he just said, "See you tomorrow." Evan started showing up every night, never flashy, never loud, always just there. He never brought bodyguards or assistants, never acted like a man who could buy the town 3 times over. Lena found herself looking forward to his visits in a way that scared her, because it felt too easy, too safe, too good. She told him about her late shifts, her absent father, her dreams of opening a bookstore no one would probably visit. He told her nothing about himself, but his silences were full of understanding, as if he'd lived lifetimes of loneliness. Sometimes they sat in silence for half an hour, and it never felt awkward. It felt like the world had paused just for them. She began to wonder who he was when he wasn't in her diner, who he was before he stopped smiling. And deep down, she knew, this man wasn't just passing through, he was circling something he couldn't name. The regulars began to notice the expensive watch on his wrist, the tension in Lena's shoulders whenever he arrived. One of the other waitresses pulled her aside. "Careful, girl. Men like that don't land, they visit." Lena brushed it off, but her heart held on to the warning, wrapping it around her ribs like armor. She wasn't naive. She'd been ghosted before, used before, lied to with kindness before, but Evan never flirted, never touched her, never promised anything. He simply showed up and listened on, made her feel like her words weren't small. Still, doubt crept in like fog, soft and slow, clouding the way she smiled when he walked through the door. And she hated how badly she didn't want to believe the others might be right. That night, a drunken customer shouted across the room, "Hey sweetheart, ditch the rich guy, he's just slumming it." Lena froze, her face burning, the tray in her hands trembling with shame. Before she could speak, Evan stood up quietly, calmly, and crossed the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch the man. He simply said, "Apologize to her now." The diner went silent, and something in his tone made the man sit down without another word. Evan turned back to Lena, eyes softer now, pained. "You don't deserve that. Ever." She nodded once, then walked away to hide her tears, because no one had defended her like that in a very long time, and she realized this wasn't just a man passing through. He had already found something worth staying for. After closing, Evan waited outside, hands in his pockets, unsure if she would even want to see him. She stepped out, eyes still red, but she didn't turn away. "I'm sorry that happened," he said, "and I'm sorry I didn't say this sooner." He handed her an envelope, heavy, elegant, with her name handwritten in bold script. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala under the Callister Foundation, with a handwritten note. "Come as my guest, just as you are." Lena stared at it, stunned. "I don't belong there." Evan looked at her with something that bordered on heartbreak. "You belong more than anyone I've met in years." And for the first time, she didn't say no. Lena stood in front of her mirror, wearing a borrowed gown from a friend, trying to believe the girl staring back was worthy. The dress was stunning, but what shook her most was the thought of walking into his world. She didn't own heels, didn't know how to wear perfume, didn't speak the language of suits and strategies, but she remembered his voice, quiet, steady, when he told her to come just as she was. When she arrived at the gala, heads turned, but Evan only looked at her like no one else in the room mattered. He took her hand gently, like it was normal, like she was already someone he was proud to be seen with. They didn't speak for a long time, because in that moment, her presence said everything. And as they stepped into the lights together, Lena realized she had stepped into a different life. Asterisk. The gala sparkled with elegant crystal glasses, orchestras, and laughter that echoed like money. Lena walked beside Evan, trying not to shrink beneath the weight of eyes that lingered too long. She could feel the stares, the silent questions. Who is she? Why is he with her? A woman in a red dress leaned over to Evan and whispered, loud enough for Lena to hear, "Bold choice." Lena stepped back slightly, embarrassed, but Evan's arm slid gently around her waist. "She's not a choice," he said firmly. "She's the only thing in this room that's real." The woman blinked, stunned, and turned away, while Lena's heart thundered with disbelief. She didn't speak the rest of the night, but Evan never let go of her hand once. Toward the end of the evening, soft music began to play, and couples floated onto the dance floor like swans. Lena stood still, watching, feeling out of place in a world that moved so gracefully. Evan stepped in front of her, hand extended, smile soft and unassuming. "I don't know how to dance like that," she whispered. He leaned in slightly, eyes warm. "Neither do I, but I know how to hold you." The moment their hands touched, the world faded, the lights, the whispers, the doubts. He guided her gently, not leading with steps, but with emotion. And as they swayed together in silence, Lena realized she wasn't pretending anymore, was becoming. The next morning, Lena opened her phone and gasped. Her picture was everywhere. "Mystery woman on Callister's arm." Read the headline. Alongside photos of her at the gala, she scrolled through cruel comments. "Waitress, really? He could do better. She's clearly a phase." Her hands shook, her face pale, as shame clawed up her spine like fire. She didn't answer Evan's texts that day, not because she was angry, but because she was terrified. Later, he showed up at the diner, eyes dark with worry, his tie askew. "You didn't deserve that," he said softly. "I'll make it go away." But Lena didn't want to be erased. She just wanted to be enough. They sat on the hood of his car that night, parked by a lake no one knew about but him. The moonlight reflected off the water, but Lena kept her gaze down, fingers tracing circles on her jeans. "Why me?" she finally asked, voice trembling. "You could have anyone. Women with status, beauty, background." He turned to her slowly, almost wounded by the question. "I see things in you the world forgot how to notice," he said. "Kindness, quiet strength, realness." She blinked back, tears. "And if I fall for you, will you leave when the sparkle wears off?" Evan shook his head gently. "You're not a sparkle. You're the light." I didn't know I'd been walking toward, and just like that, something broke open between them, wide, raw, and deeply real. A week later, Lena arrived to find the diner closed, yellow tape across the door, a sign that read, "Health violation." Her heart sank. It wasn't just a job, it was all she had. Her only routine, her last piece of stability. She sat on the curb, staring at the sign with silent devastation, not even knowing how to cry. Evan found her there hours later, still in her apron, hands clasped tightly around her knees. "Come home with me," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Let me help." But Lena shook her head, too proud, too broken to accept more from a man who already gave her more than she felt she deserved. "I need to figure it out alone," she whispered. And for once, Evan didn't fight her, he simply sat beside her. In silence, Lena distanced herself, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. She returned his calls slower, answered his texts with fewer words, and stopped accepting his nightly visits. Evan felt the cold return between them like a fog, subtle but suffocating. He didn't push, but every time she slipped away, something inside him fractured. Lena feared becoming dependent, feared being rescued, feared not recognizing herself in his shadow, but in trying to protect her heart, she had begun to starve it too. One night, Evan texted only one sentence. "I miss the sound of your voice." And she cried not because she was weak, but because she missed him too. Desperate for income, Lena applied at a small bookstore cafe across town, quieter, slower, gentler. The owner, an elderly woman named Miriam, reminded her of the version of herself she was trying to become. "I don't need perfection," Miriam said. "I need heart." Lena smiled faintly, hope flickering for the first time in days. She started working afternoons, pouring coffee again, but this time in a place that didn't feel like survival. Still, she thought of Evan constantly, his laugh, his silence, the way he looked at her like she was already enough. He hadn't shown up in a week. She didn't blame him. But one rainy Thursday, she turned around and there he was, standing in line. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at her like he wasn't sure she was real. When she finally stepped to the counter, he said gently, "One black coffee," and a chance to explain. She smiled sadly, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, her hands trembling as she poured. They sat by the window, the rain tapping softly on the glass. The world hushed around them. "I didn't want to lose myself," she said quietly. "And I didn't want to smother you," he replied, "but I didn't stop caring." She looked at him fully then, for the first time in weeks. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I just want to know if your heart is still mine." He reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "It never left." Evan invited her out again, but this time, no gala, no suits, no headlines. They went to a quiet jazz bar, dimly lit, where no one recognized him, and Lena could just be Lena. He let her choose the wine, the music, even the table, because this time, he wanted her to lead. They laughed more than they ever had, shared childhood stories, and danced without fear of cameras. Lena realized she didn't need to shrink to fit beside him, she just needed to stand fully as herself. And Evan realized that loving her didn't mean protecting her, it meant trusting her strength. At the end of the night, he didn't ask to come in. He just kissed her forehead and whispered, "When you're ready." And for the first time, Lena didn't feel rushed, she felt respected. While shelving books at the cafe, Lena opened a donated novel and found a folded paper inside. It was a letter from Evan, handwritten, raw, and sincere. "I don't love you because you paid for someone else's meal." It read, "I love you because you taught me what it means to care." Again, her hands shook as she read it, the words soaking into her like rain into dry earth. At the bottom, it said, "Page 221, for when you're ready." She flipped to the page and gasped. Taped. There was a key to a small apartment 2 blocks away. Not his home, not a penthouse. Just a place she could call her own. And beneath the key was a note. No strings, just support. Just me, just love. Lena held the key in her palm for hours, unsure whether to feel grateful or insulted. It wasn't about money, it was about control, independence, and whether she was ready to let someone support her without owning her. But the apartment wasn't. Luxurious. It was small, sunlit, and simple, just like she liked. Evan had furnished it with second-hand bookshelves, a reading chair, and a handwritten note, "In case you want quiet." When she finally stepped inside, it felt more like hers than anywhere she'd lived before. She sat on the windowsill, called him, and said, "You didn't try to save me. You gave me space to grow." He replied softly, "Because I knew if you grew you might grow toward me." And that night, she slept for the first time in a place she could finally call home. A man walked into the cafe one morning, Lena's ex, thin, bitter, and still good at pretending. He asked for 5 minutes, and she foolishly gave it, heart pounding but hands steady. He mocked her new life, called Evan a savior complex in a suit, and accused her of forgetting where she came from. "I didn't forget," Lena said calmly. "I just stopped living there." He left, but his words lingered, stirring old insecurities like dust. That night, she told Evan everything, not to explain, but because she wanted no secrets. He listened, quiet but intense, then said, "You don't need to erase your past. It made you strong enough to stand in your present." And she realized she didn't have to run anymore. An online magazine published an Expo CEO in love with waitresses at Real or PR. Photos of them holding hands, dancing, and laughing were splashed across the page with cruel speculation. Lena's stomach turned. She had tried so hard to stay invisible, and now she was a symbol. Evan saw it too, and for the first time, he looked afraid, not for himself, but for what this might do to her. "I'll shut it down," he promised. "I'll sue. I'll bury it." But Lena stopped him. "Let them talk. I know who I am, and I know who you are." She chose not to hide, and in doing so, she gained a power no headline could shake. And Evan fell in love with her all over again. It wasn't about passion. It wasn't about finally giving in. It was about choosing to share something raw, safe, and deeply vulnerable. Lena invited Evan over, not to impress him but to simply be with him. They cooked together, danced barefoot in the kitchen, and talked until the candles melted to wax. That night, they didn't rush. Evan kissed her like a question, and she answered without hesitation. They made love not like strangers finally touching, but like soulmates, recognizing what had always been there. No fear, no performance, just truth, wrapped in skin and whispers. And when they fell asleep, tangled and tired, it felt like the start of forever. Evan offered her a position not in his company, but in his foundation, to help manage community outreach programs. Lena hesitated. Was this charity or trust? Was she qualified or just loved? He smiled gently. You already do the work. Now I just want to give you a stage. After long reflection, she accepted, but only on her terms. She created a literacy project for underprivileged youth, a reading bus with books and stories and volunteers. People began to notice Lena for her mind, her vision, not just as his girlfriend. And for the first time, she stood next to Evan, not in his shadow, but beside him. He watched her in meetings, in action, and realized she didn't just inspire him, she led him. One night, after a long event, Lena barely spoke. Evan noticed her shoulders tense, her hands quiet, her eyes distant. Instead of pressing, he ran her a bath, left her tea, and played soft music. She came out in a robe, sat beside him, and simply exhaled. I don't want to talk, she whispered. Just be here. He didn't move. He didn't ask. He just held her hand. And in that stillness, she healed a little more. Because love wasn't always noise, it was presence. One morning, Evan opened up finally fully. He told her about his mother's overdose, the empire he built to forget, and the people he lost along the way. He showed her the tattoo on his ribs, hidden beneath pressed shirts, his sister's initials. Lena cried, not because he was broken, but because he had survived so much and still found space to love. He didn't want pity, he wanted to be seen. She touched his scar, kissed the skin near it, and whispered, this isn't shame. This is proof. He had spent years hiding it, but with Lena he felt honored to show it. And in that moment, he realized he was no longer alone. Evan bought no ring. He planned no scene. Instead, he built a little free library stand and placed it outside her cafe, with a plaque that read, for Lena, for the girl who gave more than she had, and changed everything. When she found it, she cried loudly, unapologetically, with joy and disbelief. He knelt, finally, right there in front of the books and the rain and the smell of coffee. I don't want perfect, he said. I want you. Will you be my wife? And Lena, hands over her heart, whispered yes. In every lifetime, they didn't kiss like a fairy tale. They held each other like a vow already spoken. They married in the back of the cafe, string lights, secondhand chairs, and a playlist of their favorite songs. The guests were her coworkers, the couple she once paid for, and the children from her reading program. Evan wore no tie. Lena wore a dress she found at a thrift store, and both smiled more than anyone had ever seen. There were no cameras, no press, no announcements, just love, raw and loud, and theirs. They wrote their own vows, fumbled the lines, and laughed through the tears. I found heaven in a diner, Evan said, and her name was Lena. She replied, I didn't need a savior, I needed someone who saw me, and I found him. And when they kissed, every light around them seemed to glow brighter. Years passed, but their love didn't fade. They opened more literacy buses, started a foundation, and turned Lena's story into a movement. People no longer asked how they met, they asked how they stayed. And the answer was always the same. We chose each other. Every day. On quiet evenings, they still sat on that cafe bench, sharing coffee and laughter like nothing had changed. Evan would sometimes whisper, I still remember that night, your kindness. And Lena would smile, kiss his hand, and say, and I still remember the night you walked in and saw me. Because their story wasn't about money, rescue, or fame. It was about one moment of kindness that became everything.